This presentation is the timeline of art education chronology. We begin with Horace Mann. Horace Mann in 1837 became the Secretary of Education in Massachusetts and toured every school in the state to see for himself the disparities in environment and resources. He advocated for normal schools to have standards in order for equality of public education for all. Friedrich Froebel. Friedrich Froebel was a German teacher and the inventor of kindergarten, a term he coined in 1837. His ideas were constructed upon the underlying unity within all created beings and things. Early exposure and experimentation to this unity would transform the mind of the young to be able to recognize the unseen structure of all things. It had a profound effect on the education of the world's children from the late 1800s to the early 1900s. It helped birth modernism in the art-architecture world. Walter Smith. Walter Smith was an influential drawing master who immigrated from England to publish his books on industrial drawing in 1873, which became part of normal school curriculum following the Industrial Age. Louis Prang. Louis Prang was a publisher and lithographer in Boston from 1850. He promoted art education in America, publishing Smith's textbooks until a falling out around 1880. Prang pushed for changes in the text to make them more student-friendly and accessible. Prang expanded into the Prang Educational Company in 1882. It is still in business today. Mary Dana Hicks Prang. Mary Dana Hicks Prang was an art teacher, author, speaker, and advocate for art instruction. She was the founder of the Social Art Club for Women. In 1880, she helped revise Smith's drawing books. She eventually married Louis Prang and continued to teach, lead, and learn well into her 80s. Joseph Mayer Rice. Joseph Mayer Rice trained in Germany as a pediatrician. He was interested in child development and what was good for kids in school. In early 1892, he observed American schools. Observed that most schools function as rigid, formal, and had no accommodations for children's enjoyment and nurture. There were a few Midwestern schools of note that demonstrated sympathy for the child and a desire to make children's lives happy and beautiful. The curriculum included progressive ideas about integrating art with the observable world and other subject matters in school. Rice wrote articles that were published broadly and helped to champion the effectiveness of art education as a way to make school more humane for children. James Hall. James Hall was an art supervisor to the 1899 Massachusetts Art Exhibition. He was an art educator who started using brushes, inks, and watercolor with students to expand their skill and visual vocabulary beyond pencil and paper. He was an independent thinker who influenced art education to reach for individual expression instead of imitation. He once stated, "Experience proves that under the influence of a sympathetic and artistic teacher, children love to exercise the artistic instincts of their natures and often gain surprising power of expression." They have, heretofore, been limited far too much in many ways. Irene Ware. Irene Ware was an art supervisor to the 1899 Massachusetts Art Exhibition. She came from a family of painters. She was first an artist, and then an educator, critic, author, and founder and director of the School of Design in Liberal Arts in New York. Her involvement in the wider world of art led her to encourage art educators to nurture their own artistic endeavors in order to become better teachers. The shared experience of making art and teaching art made one more sympathetic and connected to the art of the student. It was a more collaborative, responsive teaching model than the structured model that came before. Maria Montessori. Maria Montessori was an Italian educator that believed that freedom should be developed through choices made among structured learning activities. She based her methods on the way children learned naturally. The first Montessori school was established in Italy in 1906. Modernism in art. Modernism in art was a movement over the period from the late 1800s to the early 1900s. It had a corollary expression in art education. The naivete of children's art was compared with the simplicity and vision inherent in the modernist movement. In fact, some exhibitions were curated to show children's art beside modernist art. The critics gave mixed reviews about this comparison, but in general, the pure style of both was embraced and made inroads with art education. Alfred Stieglitz. Alfred Stieglitz was an avant-garde artist who owned a gallery on Fifth Avenue in New York City. He mounted the first serious exhibition of art by children in 1910. His focus was unschooled artists, naive, pure, and natural expressionists before they were ruined by instruction. He promoted the idea of freedom in art education instead of restriction. The Bauhaus movement. The Bauhaus movement was a German design school that influenced modernism. It was in operation from 1919 to 1933. It was related to the kindergarten movement. United art, craft, and design to make people's lives better. It was closed due to political differences when the Nazis came to power in the 1930s. The movement then spread internationally. Margaret Naumburg. Margaret Naumburg was the founder of the Walden School, first called Children's School, in 1914. It prioritized individualism over group consciousness. She argued that children should be free to develop a socially responsive individualism rather than adapt to social demands. Florence Kane. Florence Kane was the sister of Margaret Naumburg. As an artist and educator, she believed that every child has the power to create, and that the school environment should draw out this power. In her pedagogy, children painted from their emotions, imagination, and needs. Influenced by psychoanalysis and Jungian approach. Her book was published in 1951, titled The Artist in Each of Us. Kane believed in giving the children time, space, and plenty of good quality materials. She believed that you should be responsive to the needs of the children and introduce concepts when they were needed. These concepts worked beautifully in private education settings, but were harder to manage in public schools, where overcrowding and underfunding and inflexible schedules were almost universal. Ruth Frazen Shaw. Ruth Frazen Shaw was a teacher who facilitated the recording of children's stories by dictation and dictaphone. She wanted to supersede the need for proper spelling and punctuation in order to record the flow of the story. When she turned her attention to art making and wanted a similar media to allow the natural flow of children's movement and imagination to be recorded, she invented finger paints. A cook at the school helped mix up a batch of non-toxic water-based gelatinous pigment. This new medium swept across the country, and by the end of the 1930s, it became synonymous with the idea that art education should be free of restraints. Victor D'Amico. Victor D'Amico was educated in the New York public schools. He was influential in setting standards for inclusion of art education and secondary education. He wanted the child to experience freedom of expression, but with the influences of external stimuli, environment, visual references, and personal experiences, not just internal imagination. Even the introduction of new materials could be used as a stimulus for creative, spontaneous, original art. He stated, "With the proper attention and direction, the tense, the academic, and the timid can be reborn through painting into a world of freedom and satisfaction." Victor Lowenfeld. Victor Lowenfeld was raised in Austria, immigrated to England, and then later to the U.S. in 1938 to escape the Nazis. He was the writer of Creative and Mental Growth, published in 1948, and the developer of the first doctoral program in art education at Pennsylvania State University. His focus was on child study, psychology, and art education. Jean Piaget. Jean Piaget was a Swiss psychologist whose theory of child development influenced educators toward a child-centered approach to learning. He is sometimes referred to as the father of constructivism, which refers to the theory that the world makes sense to us due to our physical interaction with it. His ideas became important during the 1970s as proponents of child-centered learning took up his ideas.